People turn to pillars of salt for looking in the wrong direction? Just one. Bears sent to rip apart 42 children for mocking a bald guy? 2. People killed for complaining about God killing people? 14,700. Knowing people claim God is all good and all loving? Priceless. There are some things we can't abide. For everything else, there's Master God. Hello again, lovely internet people. I'm HR. Yep, I'm the one writing all those checks with nothing but zeros on them and sending them out to non-existent big atheism. Welcome back, or welcome to my channel, where we talk about stuff and things. Today, I want to give the Abrahamic God the credit he is due, because I've been told, and I've heard it said to many others many times, that if we just read the Bible, we would see how good and loving God is. I wonder if we're reading the same book, because when I read the Bible, the impression I got was that God is really good at being really bad. As a reminder, my views and opinions are just that, my own ideas and perspectives. I do not speak for all atheists. Also, I live in America, so my ideas don't represent a worldwide view. And as Christianity is the dominating force here, I mostly speak about that particular religion. As usual, I'll play some video replays of my art while I discuss today's topic, both to feed the comment trolls and hopefully for your enjoyment. Also, I'm gonna give a content warning on this one, because the text we'll be dealing with will cover all kinds of harms done directly by and at the order of Yahweh. Before we jump into the text at hand, I want to state up front that I don't believe the Bible to be historically accurate. I'm only reading from this book because it's the supposedly divinely inspired text that Christians say we should base our morality on, and where they say we can find out about their all-loving God. Also, I'm focusing on giving God his credit. I know there are many, many, many awful things in this book, but anything humans purportedly did to each other, I'll leave for another day's discussion. With all of that out of the way, let's see how, according to their book, an all-loving God behaves, shall we? Again, I want to mention we're going to be discussing some difficult topics today, so if that's not something that you're up for today, skip this one and I'll see you next time. So let's start at the beginning with the Old Testament. And before anyone says, but HR, that's the Old Testament. First, so what's your point? Is it or is it not part of the Bible? Is the God of the Old Testament not the same that's in the New? Second, don't worry, I'm gonna get to the New Testament. In the Old Testament in particular, the Abrahamic war god's punishments seem particularly harsh, unjust, and disproportionate. Let's look at some excerpts from a few Old Testament books. Start with Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Genesis 2:17, God lies and tells Adam that if he eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he will die that day. Spoiler, he didn't die when he ate it. Genesis 3, the source of original sin. Adam and Eve ate the fruit of a tree that was literally called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So they literally didn't know any better. Like young children, they were curious. And for their curiosity and for being naive and just not being blindly obedient, how did God punish them? Well, first, thankfully, they didn't die like God lied they would, because God kills a lot of others for disobedience in this book, but he did kick them out of Eden. He made childbirth become one of the most painful experiences a human can go through. He cursed the ground to make thorns and thistles grow. And all of that was just Adam and Eve. Supposedly, according to most Christians, we're still paying for the fruit that those long dead ancestors tasted thousands of years ago. Genesis 7:21-23, God drowns the entire population of the earth, except for Noah and his family and the few animals that are on the ark. Genesis 19:26 is the Sodom and Gomorrah portion of the Bible. God's just finished wiping all the inhabitants of 2 cities off the face of the earth with fire and brimstone from heaven, but he's not done yet. Lot's nameless wife looks back at the home she's leaving, and for that, God turns her into a pillar of salt. Genesis 38:1-10, this portion of the text talks about 2 of Judah's 3 sons, Er and Onan. God thought Er was wicked, so he killed him. Then Judah told his other son, Onan, to go sleep with Er's widow. Onan did what his father instructed, but when he, quote, spilled his seed on the ground, end quote, God killed him too. I'm not sure we're off to a good start here, if we're supposedly painting a picture of an all-loving deity. But anyway, on to the next book. The book of Exodus. We're going to be in here for a bit. In Exodus 7:13, Moses and Aaron are trying to get Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Huh? Which side is God on? If God's goal is to get the Israelites free, why would he, quote, harden Pharaoh's heart, end quote? What about that whole free will thing? Exodus 8, we're in the plagues now. Because one guy, a guy whose heart God hardened, I remind you, because that one guy won't listen, it seems that everyone in Egypt has to pay now. Exodus chapter 7 ended with a river of blood and the stench of dead fish. And here in chapter 8, it's dead frogs. God also sends lice to all people and animals in Egypt and a swarm of flies. And in chapter 9, God starts this chapter by killing all the Egyptian cattle. Then he afflicts the Egyptian people and animals with boils. Then God hardens the heart of Pharaoh again. And again, why? Is God looking for an excuse to punish people? Why is he hardening Pharaoh's heart? Here comes the 7th plague, hail. Side note, during this plague, Egyptians that feared God brought their cattle into their houses to keep them safe. You know, the ones that God killed at the beginning of the chapter? Exodus 10. So Pharaoh actually says they can go, and God has Moses summon locusts anyway. The locusts ate until nothing green remains in Egypt. And at this point, Pharaoh is like, hey, please forgive me and ask God to quit killing us. So you know what God does? That's right, he hardens Pharaoh's heart again. I guess God just really wanted to keep doing plagues? Because he hadn't put them through enough yet, God's 9th plague was 3 days of darkness. Somehow it only affected the Egyptian homes because it was light in all the Israelites' dwellings. So again, Pharaoh was like, okay, go. And again, God's like, nah, they haven't suffered enough yet. Exodus 11, the 10th plague. God tells Moses he's going to do one more plague and then the Pharaoh will let them go. He also tells the people to steal the jewels, silver, and gold from the Egyptians on their way out. Then God tells Moses that at midnight, he's going to kill all firstborn Egyptians, even the animal ones. And God hardens Pharaoh's heart one more time for good measure. Exodus 12. Even though during the darkness plague, God could tell whose house was whose, now he needs the Israelites to do some stuff so he doesn't accidentally kill the wrong kids. This is where Passover comes from. God needs them to mark their doorposts with animal blood so he knows not to kill their firstborn or animals. And then God kills at least one person in every Egyptian home. And even though he already supposedly killed all the Egyptian cattle twice in chapter 9, He apparently still has more of them to kill in this chapter. Quick thought before I jump ahead a bit. Is it Pharaoh that kept the people there? Or was it the multiple times God didn't seem to care about free will when he was hardening Pharaoh's heart? Exodus 21. Here God gives instructions on slavery. And somehow the instructions aren't, don't have slaves. Nope, instead God gives Moses details on how to do slavery God's way. Like, if you're a Hebrew servant, you have to be let go after 6 years. But if your master gave you a wife during that time, and maybe you had kids, you now have a choice. Sure, you can go free, but your wife and kids belong to your master. And if you want to stay with your wife and kids, you get your ear bored with an awl, and you serve that master forever. In this chapter, he also gives instructions on selling your daughter, polygamy, murder, disobedient children, slave stealers, assault, and slave beating. And again, God doesn't say, hey, don't own people. He says, as long as you don't beat them to death, it's fine. If they survive for at least a day or two, it's fine to beat people that are apparently fine to own. How friggin' loving. Let's move on to Exodus 22. Okay, so here God has some really weird rules about thieves. If someone breaks in and the homeowner kills the thief, the punishment depends on the time of day, apparently. If you kill the thief at night, you're good. But if you kill the thief during the day, you get killed too. But if you just catch the thief, but they're too poor to pay a full restitution, you can sell them to pay for the theft. In this chapter, God has so many rules he's giving to Moses. He also tells Moses his godly punishments, including to kill witches and anyone who believes in a different God. Exodus 35. Anyone who does work on the Sabbath? Yep, that's right, death penalty. Okay, so the supposed creator of the entire universe sure has a lot of specific rules and concerns for one species on one planet. Let's move on to the next book. See if a more loving creator is revealed to us. Leviticus. Can God make it through a book without killing people? Leviticus 10:1 through 7. 2 of Aaron's sons offer a strange fire before the Lord, so he burns them to death. And then Moses tells his brother Aaron and his other sons not to mourn because God might kill them and everyone else too. Then we have a lot more chapters of rules, and the punishment for a lot of them is death, including anyone who curses their mother or father. And then in Leviticus 21:16 through 21, God tells Moses who he does not want approaching his altar to make an offering. This includes any man who has a blemish, is blind, lame, short, has a flat nose, damaged testicles, broken hands or feet, a crooked back, anyone who has scurvy or scabs. Here I was always told that God wanted to heal the sick and blind and lame, but guess not. Leviticus 25:44 to 46. God's got more rules for slaves again. And again, he doesn't say don't own other people. No, he says to buy some heathen neighbors to be your slaves. And then they and their families are your possessions forever. And when you die, your children will inherit them because they're property, apparently. Chapter 26. God's finally got a little bit of carrot to go with his many sticks. This chapter starts with all the rewards people will get for being obedient to him. But he can't just leave it there, him being all good and all loving, because the bulk of this chapter is all about the punishments you can expect if you do not honor all the commandments he gave. First, he says that he'll send terror and that your enemies will eat your children. That's a strong opener. His next threat is that your enemies will kill you and reign over you, and you'll run even when no one is chasing you. So I guess the fear he talked about is now full-blown paranoia. But is it really being paranoid if God really is out to get you? He says your crops will fail and trees won't bear fruit. And if you still don't listen, just wait, because he's got more. He'll send wild beasts to kill your children and cattle. You still don't want to listen? He'll bring the sword upon you and deliver you to your enemies. Again, I guess? And apparently 10 women will bake bread in one oven, but it won't satisfy you, whatever that means. But if you still won't obey, you will eat the flesh of your sons and daughters. What the fuck? He keeps going with the threats, including that your enemies will eat you. Wasn't expecting cannibalism to make an appearance, but apparently God endorses it as a punishment. What a freaking loving God we have here. I can't even count how loving all that was. Maybe a book called the Book of Numbers can help. It's ironic that in a book called Numbers, it's hard to keep track of just how many people God murders or commands the murder of in this book. Number 16, God wants to kill everyone, but Moses and Aaron plead with him and talk him out of it. Instead, God opens up the earth to swallow just a few families and all their stuff, and then he uses fire to kill 250 men for offering incense. And then the people understandably get upset that God is killing so many people, so God again decides that he's going to kill everyone. And ironically, Moses and Aaron stop God's murder spree by burning some incense. Before they can stop it, though, God had killed 14,700 because they complained about him murdering people. Numbers 31, this time instead of killing people himself, God commands the Israelites to murder all the Midianites except the young virgins, who they are to keep alive for themselves. I don't think I have to explain why all of this is wrong. So very wrong. Let's move on. Deuteronomy, fortunately, still doesn't get any better. God commands more genocide, saying, you must not let anything that breathes remain alive. You shall annihilate them. The Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, just as the Lord your God has commanded. In this book, God gives instructions on how to treat the women they imprison as war captives. God's so nice and loving that he makes sure they give the women 1 whole month to mourn their family before they have to become brides. God also gives instructions about stoning rebellious sons and how to hang people on trees. Book of Joshua, because God didn't get enough genocide and murder yet. In the book of Joshua, he commands and helps the Israelites to destroy Jericho, and then the people of Ai, and then the people of Makkedah, and Libnah, and Lachish, and Eglon, and Debir, and so on until the entire populations of 31 city-states were utterly destroyed. Stop in Judges for a minute, because I have heard so many sermons about Abraham and Isaac. This isn't the story of Abraham and Isaac. It's about a different father and child. God helps a man named Jephthah murder a bunch of people. Jephthah vows to offer whatever comes out of his house to greet him when he gets home as a burnt sacrifice to the Lord. His unnamed daughter is who greets him. God doesn't intervene in this child sacrifice as he famously did with Abraham and Isaac. And Jephthah offers his daughter as a burnt sacrifice to the Lord. In 2 Samuel, King David takes a census. God was not pleased that King David counted people. Instead of punishing David, he sends a pestilence that kills 70,000 men. In 2 Kings, some kids mock Elisha's bald head, so Elisha curses them in the name of the Lord, and 2 she-bears come out of the woods and tear apart 42 children. Then there's the entire book of Job, where Job's life is wrecked and his animals and servants and children are murdered so God can win a bet. I don't even think we're halfway through the Old Testament, But I'm going to stop here with the book of Job because enough is enough. This God character is clearly a villain, not the good guy. But supposedly he mellows out after he has/is his own kid. So let's see if he gets suddenly more loving in the New Testament. As we did with the Old Testament, let's start at the beginning of the New Testament with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm not going to go verse by verse again because I think most people know the gist of the stories. Putting aside the message that we are all awful, dirty sinners deserving of punishment just for existing, and skipping discussions of the Trinity aspect, which would imply that God took a fraction of a second out of his eternity to get himself sacrificed to himself to appease himself, just setting all of that aside for now, the whole concept of Jesus's brutal torture, suffering, and death to somehow atone for the sins of others may actually be one of the most immoral parts of the Bible. Redemption by proxy is unjust and makes no sense. Jesus was executed because of his own actions, not for the actions of generations past, and certainly not for actions done today. Would you go to jail for the life of a stranger that broke the law? I'm guessing most people would say no, because substitutionary atonement is generally not okay. Let's ruminate on forgiveness for a bit. Have you ever forgiven someone? Did you require someone to be sacrificed before you did it? Humans forgive each other daily, and they don't need anyone to die before doing so. So why does a supposedly benevolent God require a blood sacrifice to grant forgiveness? Let's consider another aspect of forgiveness as it is frequently presented in many devout religious families and communities. It goes something like this. You have to forgive your abuser because Jesus already forgave him. Substitutionary atonement isn't just about the person who has done something wrong. It robs victims of agency because it includes the idea that someone else has already paid for the crime committed against them. I don't consider Jesus' sacrifice a gift. I don't accept it as this beautiful thing that theists try to frame it as. I don't believe that it's okay to punish someone else for the supposed sins of their ancestors. I don't believe it is okay to punish anyone other than a perpetrator. I don't believe that it is a prerequisite of forgiveness to have a blood sacrifice. Honestly, this whole idea, I'm done. So let's move on from the Gospels. Ephesians 6:5. Here we have more about slavery. And it still doesn't say don't own other humans. Instead, it tells slaves to obey their masters. And yes, comment apologists, I know this was Paul or Paul's brother, but they claim they are getting their ideas directly from the big guy. Same again in Colossians 3:22-24, more slaves obey your masters. And then in 1 Peter 2:18, this gets expanded on. Still telling slaves to obey their masters, but adding, even if your masters are unreasonable. Alrighty then. You know what? Let's skip to the end of this thing. The last book of the Bible. Perhaps God has a last-minute change of heart and recognizes his awful and wicked ways and promises he's going to be all loving. And that's where people get the idea? The book of Revelation. Nope, it doesn't get any better. The God of the Bible retains his terrible ways to the very end. Not content with all he did in antiquity, this book threatens a bloody, dismal, and frightening future for humanity. The book starts the countdown to the apocalypse with Jesus himself appearing via vision to the author. This book it's a lot. So this isn't going to be comprehensive or super detailed, but we'll hit on some of the main points of what loving things God has in store for humanity. So, of course, we've got the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first is either the Antichrist or maybe pestilence. The second brings war and violence. The third is famine, and the fourth is death. Then we'll get a massive earthquake that moves all islands and mountains and reduces humanity to hiding in caves. We'll get hail and fire mixed with blood that rains down, burning up trees and grass, and something resembling a burning mountain that crumbles into the sea, destroying ships and turning most sea life into blood. A star will fall from the sky to poison a third of all rivers and water. 4 angels will release 200 million horsemen to kill another third of the remaining humans with plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur from their mouths. But wait, there's more. We'll get another earthquake with massive aftershocks. This one will shake the planet so much that the entire continents will be relocated, and the sun will turn black while the moon turns red, and even the very heavens will be whisked away, quote, like a scroll getting rolled up, end quote. Angels will pour out 7 bowls or vials on the earth, filled with plagues that destroy pretty much anything and anyone left. These include oozing sores, the remaining seas and rivers turning to blood, thus killing all sea life, and a massive heat wave that scorches the earth so much and is hot enough that it causes people to spontaneously combust. But wait, there's more. More darkness and another massive earthquake. This one has thunder and lightning. We also have stars start showering down to earth from the heavens. The whore of Babylon comes riding in on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. She'll be drunk off the blood of slain saints and martyrs. An angel will fall to earth and open up the abyss, which will billow out enough smoke to blacken the sun. Again, I guess. And will release a horde of nightmare fuel locusts. These locusts will wear crowns of gold, their faces and hair will resemble human faces, and they'll have lion-like teeth. They'll be instructed to torture people who don't have the sign of God on their foreheads. But God's so nice, it'll only be for a quick 5 months. There's even more, but this is getting long, so I'm gonna stop here and start my wrap up. Okay, so this loving God I've heard about, he's not exactly in the Bible. Let's look at just a couple other examples believers have cited at me as proof of God's love. According to various news sources, at least 50,000 people died in recent earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. It's estimated that more than 1 million are now homeless. This is a horrible tragedy. There is deep loss and pain. But I've seen multiple feel-good news pieces and posts about miraculous rescues of people that give credit to God. If God is to get credit for saving people from the rubble of these disasters, why doesn't he also get credit for all the deaths from the disaster? After all, isn't everything according to God's will? Wouldn't it have been better if God didn't kill over 50,000 people to save just a few? This is repeated in almost every disaster. Someone survives an awful circumstance and God gets thanks for protecting them, but no blame for all the others that were harmed. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then when I bring that up, I inevitably get a version of 2 different answers. It's atheists and sinners that have brought God's wrath upon us, or God made us so he can do what he wants with us. So to take that first part, if God is all-powerful, surely he could just send his wrath upon those that supposedly deserve it. It doesn't track that every person lost or harmed in these disasters is an atheist or living life in a way that isn't in accordance with what the church says the right way to live is. Before someone says, we're all sinners. So yes, they all deserved it. I'm going to set aside that I don't believe that and ask, does that include babies in the womb and small children that are lost or orphaned in these events? Are they also evil and deserving of death? I don't think so. And as for God made us so he can do what he wants with us, are you cool with someone abusing their child? They made the kid. They should be able to do what they want with them, right? No? You think we should protect children from abusive parents? Why then is it okay when a supposed super being does it? Let's talk about hell for a quick moment. There are arguments that hell, as is widely conceptualized today, isn't even in the Bible. But for the sake of argument, let's say it is real. No just deity would create a system of infinite punishment for finite transgressions. Some people think that an atheist or an LGBTQIA person who has lived a good life, not harmed anyone, and helped others as much as possible, is still going to hell. Jeffrey Dahmer, on the other hand, accepted God and repented at the end, so he has a better chance of getting into heaven than an atheist or someone who is LGBTQ. It is also baffling to me that people who think their loved ones are going to a place of eternal torment think that they will be carefree and totally happy in heaven. Will God not worry about free will anymore? Because I couldn't be happy knowing that loved ones were being tortured for existing the way God made them. Now let's talk about God's followers. An incalculable amount of war and genocide has been committed in the name of God. The Inquisition wreaked havoc on the female population of Earth. Of Europe. Of Earth, too. Of Europe. The Crusades killed God followers on both sides. The English Reformation killed Catholics because they didn't worship God the right Protestant way. The KKK believed they were following God's orders with their heinous acts. The Bible has been used to justify slavery and way too many other horrible things. And finally, some people say that the Bible has human influence, and that is why it is flawed, and then in the next sentence still say it is the divinely inspired word of God. Which is it? The perfect word of God, or a man-made text with flaws? The Old Testament says things. The New Testament says things. How does one discern which parts are human corruption and which parts are God's divinely inspired word? Were God to exist, an assumption for which there is no proof, no need, and little basis, were the God of the Bible to exist, he is a cruel, temperamental, and vindictive character who isn't worthy of worship. I am so glad there's no evidence that the Abrahamic God is real. And for my final related but slightly off-topic thought, why is it that when people say, God told me to donate, or God led me to be in the right place at the right time, a lot of people believe them without question. But when someone does something awful and says God told them to do it, why aren't they believed? As we just covered, God supposedly told plenty of people to commit atrocities in the Bible. So if you're someone that doesn't believe people who say that now, why do you believe that it happened in this ancient book? Anyway, this video got way longer than I intended, so if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. Please like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Atheist or theist, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please be respectful to others. Debate is great, but let's stay out of debasement. I've got a website, renewedviews.com, and I stream on Twitch if you want to see even more stuff and things. I've also got a Patreon if you've got a few bucks you can spare to help me to continue to create. Thanks again for watching, and maybe you'll see me in the next one.